Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound is a every other week video show where we spend about 40 or 45 minutes talking about relevant topics in DevOps. DevOps Unbound is sponsored by our good friends at Tricentis. It has been since day one, and we're very thankful to Tricentis for their sponsorship and help with the show. More than just saying they're a sponsor or writing a check, Tricentis is intimately involved with us in helping us pick our topics, finding guests, and just keeping the show on track because it's not an easy thing. So many thanks to Linear Norval and the rest of the Tricentis gang for helping us. This week's show's a great show. It's all about feature flags. We're going to jump into feature flags in a second. But first, I want to introduce you to this great panel. Starting us off as a frequent guest here on DevOps Unbound. We love having him on. He always has great insights and things to say. It's our friend Brian Dawson. Brian, welcome.
Thank you for having me again.
Mm-hmm. Brian, why don't you give people a little bit of your background, if you don't mind?
Yeah, a bit about my background is I started my journey as a developer, actually creating console games. It was what we now know as PlayStation, which I'll talk a bit about later. But that really triggered. That was my first experience with what you would call kind of the rudimentary days of sort of feature flags, pragmas, etc. I eventually went on to the company that founded Subversion, and there got an opportunity to go out to a number of clients and help them implement continuous integration, continuous delivery, and more modern practices. And then today I work with a bevy of great partners in the blockchain space at a company called Ripple.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Next up is a first timer on DevOps Unbound, but she works with a company that's not new to us here at TechStrong. Actually, they were the second sponsor of DevOps.com in 2013, 2014. And that's CloudBees, and this is Hope Lynch from CloudBees. Welcome, Hope.
Thank you. As you said, I'm at CloudBees. Long career in technology. I often tell people if there's a job you've done in technology, from pulling wire, working on servers, coding, pretty much everything. I've touched it at one time or another. Spent some time at Cisco, spent some time at Red Hat. My most recent role before coming to CloudBees, and at CloudBees, I am in product marketing. But before that, which is why I was so interested in this conversation, I was a product manager for an IoT platform. So microservices, feature flagging was a pretty critical part of how we were getting our jobs done.
Absolutely. And of course, the whole DevOps of things, if you will, bringing DevOps sort of ways of looking at things like feature flags to IoT devices is such a big, it's a new frontier we're going to be exploring. I'm actually in the middle of writing something up about DevOps World coming up later this month. And, the theme there is DevOps Remix. And we're also doing another show the month after called DevOps Experience and DevOps of things and this whole DevOps everywhere. And these two ideas run in together where we're seeing DevOps go where no DevOps has gone before, right? And into IoT, into the edge. And feature flags, of course, plays a big role in that. Testing plays a big role in that. It's really going to change a lot of patterns that we've developed. Anyway, thanks, Hope, for joining. And let me introduce you now to our third panel member today. He's also been on DevOps Unbound before. You may recognize the handsome bearded mustache. It's our friend Adam Kalsey. Hey, Adam, welcome.
Thanks for having me. So a little bit about myself. I started as a developer in my career way back in the dark ages before cookies existed in browsers. And I currently lead some of our product management organization at Tricentis. I've been building products exclusively for developers for about 15 years now. And Alan, you missed an opportunity to coin a term. You should have called it FingOps.
You know what? It's not too late. Let me see if Mitchell, check out if FingOps.com.
I just registered. Got it.
That's going to be really popular with IoT crowd. I'll just tell you.
I bet. But you know, Adam, in a case of what's old is new again, if Google has their way, we might be doing away with cookies, right? So we'll see what happens with cookies. So and then bringing up, certainly last but certainly not least, is my co-host for DevOps Unbound, as well as one of my partners here at TechStrong Group, a longtime friend, Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitch, welcome.
Good to be here, Alan. Great panel. I'm not going to tell you when I started developing and what wasn't around back then. That's a whole nother day. But I'm excited today because it's Flag Day and DevOps Unbound. Flag Day. Talking about feature flags. So let's get right into it. All
right. There were punch cards involved, though, right, Mitch?
At least one deck of them, yes.
Yeah, I remember these. Anyway, guys, we're here to talk about feature flags today, and it's going to be a great conversation. Our audience, I pride myself that our TechStrong audience is rather sophisticated from a DevOps point of view. We are DevOps.com, and technology in general. But there might be people who are watching out here who say, I think I know what a feature flag is. What does that have to do with cookies, right? They're not 100% sure. So who wants to tackle? You know what, Hope, I'm afraid we're going to call on you to lead it off if you don't mind. Why don't you kind of baseline for the audience? What are we talking about here with feature flags?
Right. I will say it in this way. So if you are deploying software and you don't want to make a big bang deployment, or you don't want to, let's say, test everything in production on everyone at the same time, if you use feature flags, you can target your deployment. You can have a very small test group. So if you want to test with, let's say, an affinity group that knows they want to be your beta customers every time, you can roll out to them only, see how it performs. And if it's going well, roll it out more widely, maybe also in a targeted fashion. But if not, then you can have an easier way just to turn those features off and make your improvements. So feature flags give you a lot of control on who can see what as your end users, and you can also make their experience better by sometimes targeted improvements, targeted enhancements, just going to certain users.
And I would add, if you've ever been forced to commit by your lead dev before your code was ready, you feature flag something out.
Fair enough. So let me play devil's advocate or shill in the audience. So what's the difference between feature flag and A/B testing?
I'm going to jump in on that one here with you. I think one of the big differences is you don't have to deploy code with feature flags. It's already out there, just enabling and disabling what's there. So you might still deploy code for future features or whatever, but that's one of the big advantages, is just turning things off and on without deploying any code.
Yeah, I agree. That's certainly it. We look at, or maybe it's me, when I look at feature flags, I look at it from sort of what is the end user experience, right? An end user experience can have an A or a B or a C or a multitude of different experiences, depending what flags are turned on or off. But I think another way of looking at this is, what's the view from the other side of the dashboard? What's the view from the development side or the ops side or the testing side even? And how do we interpret, what we see with feature flags, and then how does that influence what we're doing? Adam, you want to maybe take us down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, one of the things that happens a lot of times is you're implementing feature flags. You push something out and you run your tests and find out that oh, I only tested one of the paths, the feature flags, and it starts to get even messier when you get dozens of flags, hundreds of flags, thousands of flags. And how do you test all of those and ensure that you're actually testing all the different configurations and all the different possibilities? And it's a mess, especially as you start having flags that should be retired. They've been there too long. They're no longer used. Do I even toggle this flag on to run my test because this thing's been around too long now? And nobody's flipped it on or off. So I mean, you need good feature flag management. You need a good understanding of what all the flags are, what they do, what should be in different scenarios and what aren't. And without a good map of that, it's impossible to set your flags correctly, whether you're talking about production usage or testing or anything else.
And Adam, if I could add, I'm glad you brought up QA and also proper management, right? Because properly created, configured, and managed, when we talk about the value to QA, there's a number of things. One thing, for instance, I've run into a lot as Agile and DevOps and 2-week sprints really started to take hold is that QA often has a hard time keeping up, right? So one of the things using QA as an example, that you're able to do is you're able to deploy the features that you have the ability to test, and then you can toggle off a production test, then toggle in production, which speaks to an overall value of feature flags. There's a similar benefit to the people that are responsible for deployment. You don't necessarily have to wait for a feature to be fully tested, right? You can deploy the package, and then the team can turn on features as they feel they're ready to be rolled out to production, either to a whole group or, as Hope mentioned, progressively to other groups. So I like to say there's feature flags enable continuous everything for everybody in the SDLC.
Yeah,
we're not building a big bang deployment. Sorry, Adam.
Yeah.
I've long said that you can't have a continuous delivery unless you have the three-legged stool of continuous testing, feature flagging, and observability. You have to know that what you put out there is working. You have to be able to control what people see, and you have to be able to test it all. And you have to do that all in both production and in lower environments. We used to use I test in production as a pejorative, and now it's a way of life. But the thing is you can't test only in production, and you have to test everything. I mean, you have to test to make sure your feature flags are working. Did you actually toggle off the thing you thought you were toggling off?
Right. And I think going back to, though, the point around A/B testing, A/B often is, for some organizations, a trial balloon. We're going to change something. We're going to change something relatively small. Who does it resonate with? At that point, often, you don't really need the QA team involved. They're not going to do integration testing or end-to-end testing on something like that. But then when you start to dive deeper and you say, we're choosing B, everyone rally around that, and we're going to swarm and build, we're going to build B and deliver that to a wider range of customers. That gives a lot of those QA teams enough runway to understand what's coming and hopefully prepare for it a little more, so they're not left behind as much as they sometimes are.
Yeah, there's two different ways that happens. I mean, you've got either A/B testing as I'm trying to decide which way I'm going to do, and in which case your QA probably should have tested both of them and make sure they both work. But also, I increasingly see feature flagging and A/B testing as a substitute for some testing. Hey, let's spin this out to 2 or 3 users and find out if anybody screams. Let's let our users be our QA. That may be appropriate in some things. It's probably not appropriate if you're testing, nuclear missile alerts in Hawaii, and you
let's not
tell everybody that you're.
That's what that was.
I remember that one. Yeah.
So let us now jump into. I feel like we've laid a good foundation here on feature flags. The title of today's show is Feature Flags and Microservices, Oil and Water. We've seen feature flags obviously become sort of mainstream DevOps. I think we haven't said it, and if we haven't, I'll say it now. It's because it directly relates to one of the fundamental DevOps principles, which is feedback loops, right? I can't think of a better example of feedback loops than feature flags, actually. Now, but the world's changed since we first, read the Phoenix Project almost 10 years ago now, right? And cloud native microservices has burst on the scene. We are seeing these monolithic applications being deconstructed and redeployed as a stream of microservices that coordinate and work together. There are some people who say, yeah, microservices doesn't work so good with feature flags. Well, if you believe they do, let's hear why. Or you believe they do not, let's hear why not. What's the problem? If you believe they do, let's hear why. I'll throw it open to any of you to kick it off, and I'm interested in everyone's opinion.
I think it's important, Alan, that that we kind of subdivide the space. And as you said earlier, I want to kind of underscore, we've talked a lot about user-facing feature flags or feature flagging user-facing features, right? But let's also keep in mind that we can feature flag backend, and we can feature flag backend at almost any level of granularity. So I'd say on one side of that argument, when we say microservices doesn't work with feature flags, well, not necessarily. If I run a microservice, I can feature flag out components or functionality within that microservice as long as I ensure I'm preserving my interface contract with the people that are consuming my service, right? But then now when you start to talk about what I'll call system level feature flags, right? Which are usually, those could still be backend, but I'm going to grossly say that those are your user-facing feature flags. Now, what happens with microservices, of course, is you can have 5, 10, 15, 50 different microservices, many of those run and developed by different teams that all roll up to represent a user flow or a user-facing feature, right? So now we've broken into these individual teams to enable autonomy and velocity. But wait a sec, how do we establish that there's a feature flag that we want to set to turn on or off a system feature across 50 microservices, right? So now you do kind of get attention, because to feature flag out that user-facing feature across those 50 microservices, now you break some of that autonomy or atomic benefit of microservices. So I lay all that out to kind of set the stage and say, well, I know we have solutions and counters. There is some real validity to the perception that feature flags and microservices are oil and water.
Yeah, and I believe that, pretend there are two of me. I'm an A/B test right now. So I believe that microservices can work with feature flags if you are using it to validate changes in microservices. So if you have so many that it is hard for the team to manage, and I've been with teams that have had challenges just managing that distribution. If you set it up so internally, it can validate changes in individual microservices in your production environment, fantastic. The con for me is one of the things that microservices was supposed to get us away from was all of the deep coupling that we've seen and the additional complexity. So this is taking us back sort of in the direction of service-oriented architecture. May work for some, may not work for others.
Yeah, I'd question the entire premise that anyone thinks that these things shouldn't be used together. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a developer who has implemented microservices at any sort of scale who thinks that that feature flagging or some way of controlling deployments, as Brian pointed out, you've got the contract changed. How do you ensure that the clients are in sync? And that's part of that decoupling of the tight coupling. If I have to deploy all of the clients or all the dependent services every time I make a change, it's a mess. And I'm going to sound like an advertisement for feature flag management companies here. But if you don't have a good way of managing your feature flags, if you've built some homegrown system where, it worked for 10 or 12 or 100 flags, once you start getting into these complex webs of there's 16 downstream dependencies and all the flags need to be toggled at the same time and in the right order for that to happen, that's going to be a mess. And then, again, sounding like an ad for the company I work for, testing those and having good contract tests and knowing that that the different systems are able to use the right API contracts and that they're getting the ones that they thought they got when you do change those flags is crucial. Otherwise, you're going to have downstream problems and unexplained stability and very, very, very hard to debug things.
Alan, I remember there were maybe a handful of articles making that argument, right? That's been a few years back, maybe 3 or 5 or something like that. And to me, it's run amok, run uncontrolled. Feature flags could bring chaos to any environment, just like, duplicative microservices and, subdividing things too far, going too far with it. A big advantage can be our worst enemy. I think that the thing, and I'm not making the premise that they aren't made for microservices. Of course, you can use them in microservices or not, right? But I think what it does is add another layer of complexity to it. And what you were saying, Adam, about you have to manage that across the team, not just within a team, right? You could have people implementing duplicate feature flags, right? Just imagine the folks in an ops environment, whether it's dev or SRE or an ops person, with hopefully an observability or platform, trying to put all this together, right? What versions of what code were we running when? What was serverless, if that was maybe in the mix? And what were the feature flags that were set at that time? Did anybody log it or have some way to track all that? So it does add another layer of complexity. So I think you've got to be, apply good engineering, but also kind of product engineering, product management across the team to bring a little bit of discipline to it. So it just doesn't become insanity, right?
And I think, also there's a bit of kind of human interaction. I think, you've probably heard me, Mitch, we've done a few of these saying at the end of the day, humans are endpoints of code, right? They're where it's created, they're where it lands. And what does happen as you coordinate feature flags across these multiple services, at the end of the day, you need to enable teams to coordinate, right? You think about the scenario where maybe I have a feature flag where we're trying to take a piece out of the system. I flag something out that within my microservices turns off a subfunction, effectively, to put it generically. Now I call into that interface contract is the same, but I'm getting a null value for one of my variables, one of my, and all of a sudden my service dies. I don't know why. So again, this is where you have to have systems and processes to coordinate those flags. You have to have people working together. And then I'll get to what we haven't talked about, I think, for the audience. Here's where interfaces start to become important. If I recall Martin Fowler's initial blog about what has now become feature flags and ultimately feature management, I believe he did talk to having to manage that at code level at scale, right? And I think it's implied, and most of our audience probably gets it, but let's call out that when we talk about enterprise feature management and enterprise feature management across microservices, a UI and UX to check, control, and toggle those flags is critical, right? But it's not inherent in the definition. But then again, when we go to enterprise feature management, one thing that you should think about here is not only a dashboard to turn them on and off, but a dashboard that provides a shared view and leads to a shared understanding of what's on, what's off, what's flagged, et cetera.
Well, I think that goes. I'm sorry, go ahead, Adam.
It's not just useful in this, so it's crucial in order to. If I'm going to change an API contract and I'm going to break things down the road, if I can run 2 versions of that API so that somebody can then run against either one and provide a deprecation. In order for them to effectively roll this out and manage this across the enterprise, you have to do it through feature flagging. The upstream teams need to be able to not do these big bang things. And whether it's a feature flag through literally implemented in code or whether they're treating their deployments as a feature flag, Hope, do you have a lot of people using feature flags to kind of manage deprecation of things? Have you seen that very much at CloudBees?
At CloudBees, I'm a little more removed from the day to day, but I think there are a few in previous organizations. I think it was something that was always a goal, but was hard for the teams that I was working with to do well, right? It was more of a manual task for some of them, but I think partly because feature flags for them at that time were a lot newer, and they were more focused on the implementation. How do we clean up all of these flags that we see out here? But it did definitely help. It did help with branching, right? So once you have the flag turned off, we don't have all of these long-lived feature branches. That part was more automated, but not so much with other deprecation. Yeah.
Well, and Brian called it enterprise feature management. That idea of not just one of the great things if you're using an enterprise feature system and it's across the entire enterprise is I can go look and see, does anyone still have this feature implemented? Is this code path now dead? And so where I might be able to look in my microservice and go, oh, nobody's hitting the microservice. It's safe to turn off this version. Is it though? Is this a microservice that somebody hits once every 6 months? And I turn it off, but it breaks. But if I can go look at a source of truth and say, hey, everybody has moved their feature flags onto the new version. Now it's safe to actually do that deprecation. That's huge.
Oh yeah. And looking at which flags are off, which flags have basically been removed, that generally is saying we have accepted this. This is our path to production now. That has been useful for a lot of teams because it's already somewhat confusing for some, depending on how they've implemented their feature flag management. That I think is always a source of conversation in most organizations. But if they have their continuous integration, continuous delivery paths mostly worked through, and they have integrated feature flagging into that, and every team has understood this is part of our way of working, I think it speeds everyone up. It's a great practice too.
And I know Alan needs to shift our subject, but I want to jump in real quick to underscore, because Alan asked earlier, how do feature flags affect the experience for people that are upstream? And I think you and Adam hit on a key thing. Ultimately, while it's some extra work to coordinate, it can simplify your code. It can make your code less brittle. It can reduce branching. It can make your code less complex. It can free you from having to manage deprecated code to the same level.
Absolutely. But, I think one of the things we've skirted around, but we really haven't hit head on, and I think it directly relates to the whole microservices thing, is the issue of scale, right? When we talk about feature flags, this is not just, is the background red or blue? Is my button rounded corner or square corner? Like interface kinds of things like that. But the behind the code, there, the UI, UX, I mean, the sheer scale of feature flags. At some level, feature flags, as it relates to microservices, has almost been a victim of its own success. In that once we start using them and we see the good, right? We got that feedback. We see what we can do with
more.
Button down the hatches, man. We just keep adding more and more feature flags. I've seen, we've done series in the past, videos with some of the feature flag companies, and the sheer number of feature flags being deployed is literally in the billions at this point, right?
I think
on a very regular basis.
We've met the enemy and they are us, right?
Yeah. And so when you take that kind of scale and then it bumps into microservices, which is trying to, scaling microservices is yet another issue. We could probably do another DevOps Unbound on, right? It really kind of is oil and watery a little bit, right? It really does. And Look, the easy answer is, well, you got to use a feature flag program for this because the scale is just, yes, you have to use a feature flag program. That's a no-brainer. But what does that feature flag program have to have that really allows you to work at that scale in microservices kind of architecture environments and still be able to make the testers happy and the developers happy and the security folks happy, as well as the end users, right?
It has to have knowledge. It has to have knowledge of everything that's out there and be able to expose that. Once you have tens of thousands of flags, where are they being used? Who's using them? How often are they being used? What code paths are active? Which ones are not? Which ones should we be retiring? And that's where building your own seems kind of nuts. I mean, look, you can build your own. But you can build your own credit card processing system too. But unless that's your core business, go use something from someone else. Whether it's CloudBees or one of their fine competitors. It's scale with microservices, knowing what things are being used and where is just crazy important.
I would add to that, Adam, and it's also, what are they for? What is this feature flag for? And do we all use it the same way? There's also a school of thought of treat feature flags as having a life cycle, right? Because they may be introduced for some internal testing. I think you gave that example, Adam. But it could be for beta features that are being used by certain users in the market. We could, flip the flag and be on release day the next day. It could be for duplicate. You could actually have duplicate code, right, with variations of it, using feature flags to turn on or manage which ones are turned on in what scenario. But I think you want to avoid the problem of, some feature flags are meant to stay around, but not all feature flags, right? They do need to have an end of life. If they were for a specific purpose like that. So, but that's that sort of life cycle management, treat it as a product or part of the product. So I think that's part of what you're talking about, Adam. It's knowing what's there, but also why is it there? What's it doing? And how are we going to use it today, tomorrow, and then maybe stop using it if we do?
And if I may, Mitch, I think you call out a key thing when you talk about change. So Alan, before we get to kind of what does the solution need, hit a couple of things. Look, you oftentimes feature flag usage grows from bottom up. I think now we're starting to see it come in from sort of top level engineering practices down or product. I think in either of those, similar to a DevOps transition, you get a point where you need to have a thoughtful, deliverable rollout. Right. So you need to have change management. You need to have communication. You need to have alignment around the philosophy of why we use it. What do we flag? And then to your point, Mitch, a life cycle. A couple of things I'd like to call out, Hope, before I hand it right over to you, is going to be when we talk about what ideally do you need to see in an enterprise feature management solution? Well, we need language support, right? We need language. We need stubs, ideally, that allow us to easily integrate those feature flags across possibly the multiple languages or across our tech stack, right? Ideally, you would have those stubs be able to grab some of that intelligence that could then be rendered that Adam would call out. Right, you need a rich, easy to use user interface that hopefully can either extract or enable you to tag some additional context around those feature flags, so on and so on. But Hope, I'll stop there because I realized you were jumping in.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. One of the other things that I think is really important that is sometimes overlooked when talking about feature flagging, and especially if it's a homegrown solution, is what is your governance model? How are you addressing security? How are you addressing role-based access? How are you auditing to understand what changes were made? That's something that's relatively simpler to do if you have a small team. But if you're talking about dozens and dozens of microservices and thousands of featured flags across a large enterprise, without having some mechanisms in place to manage those things, you lose control of what's happening and how your processes are rolling.
Yeah, I remember the first time that we started talking about feature flagging and somebody was saying, well, we should look at some of these vendors that are out there that are doing this. I said, that's insane. Why do I need to outsource my if statement? And then and then we ended up with a few dozen of these across a few dozen different microservices. And I went, oh, that's why I need to. It's not outsourcing my if statement. It's outsourcing all of the decision making and understanding that's behind that if statement.
Right. Or providing infrastructure for the decision making around that that if statement. That's a good one, though. Outsource my if statement.
I like it too.
But guys, let me, we're more almost done here. There's a couple of things I want to make sure we hit for our audience. And when we talk about scale, and feature flags is a scale issue today, right? If you're using feature flags, you're probably using them at some scale, best practices. This, a spreadsheet isn't the option, Adam, to your point about homegrown. I can't imagine people using feature flags and microservices and these things and trying to track this stuff like in a spreadsheet. You've got to be using, and there are some fine feature flag management solutions out there. CloudBees has one, of course, as Hope mentioned, but there are others too. I'm not here to endorse one over the other. I'm just saying use one, right? You can't be serious about using feature flags without a feature flag management program. You can't be serious about using feature flags in a microservices or architecture-based application without having some feature flag management product that really integrates in your development team, your QA, as I mentioned before, security folks, all of that. Now, that all being said, has feature flags matured to the point where we see sort of a best practices, right? And if so, what are some of these best practices beyond using a real program to manage them? Anybody?
I feel that one future best practice, let's say, there are a lot of organizations who are seeing feature flags aligned to features, absolutely, because it's called feature flags, right? But understanding how that is tied to your business and what your business wants and your business outcomes is also really important, because focusing at too low of a level may not let you tie back to what your overall organization is actually trying to accomplish. And if there's a major change, being able to narrow down which work is tied to those flags that affects that business outcome could be pretty critical in the future versus someone going through, even with an application, and having to pick through and make those associations.
And I'll add two that I think are extensions of some comments earlier. I think one is align around a what and why, similar to next step, kind of down from the business objectives across these multiple, two pizza teams, microservices teams, however we used to describe them. Above that, there should be we view feature flags as this. We use them in this case. You can even categorize or type them so you have an internal lexicon to talk about it. And then again, what a system or a solution won't necessarily take care of you alone is going to be, how do we communicate what we're doing across those, which will then get to my second best practice that I would recommend. And that's to do regular review, cross-functional, cross-team reviews of the feature flags that have been established, evaluating, one, how they impact other systems. Two, are they still needed? So two of those two practices can help better align on how do we establish and maintain them, and then how do we track and deprecate those so that feature flags don't end up creating more technical debt than reducing tech debt.
I'm going to disagree a little bit that I don't think feature flags are a solved problem. I don't think we know enough about the problem domain to have a lot of good best practices. And what is considered a best practice today may be a terrible practice once we start learning enough about it. And we've got feature flags used in so many different scenarios. There's phased rollouts. That's part of A/B testing. It's part of all sorts of different things. And treating them all in one way, or trying to establish a practice for feature flags is probably going to narrow our thinking down enough that this is such a relatively new thing that we don't really understand the behaviors and the governance models and the human behaviors on the back end of this well enough to start saying these are the best ways to do things. And we should let teams explore and find their own best ways right now. That trying to set any sort of a best practice may be kind of restrictive in the growth of this and in our understanding of how this stuff works.
Fair.
Yeah, I worry. I get the point, but I worry that it could that there's you need to strike a balance between freedom and exploration, and to Alan's point from earlier, just having people create feature flags, littering the code with feature flags, right? And I do. So yeah, I think that's an important point, Alan, Adam. But I'd call out to people, there has to be a balance, right? Just letting people run can create a ball of yarn that's hard to unravel.
Yeah, and I'm going to concur. And it brings to mind in some organizations where people say we want to experiment, we want to innovate, right? Experimentation and innovation are processes and practices to find a way to feed back what you've learned, how you've improved into the organization. It's not a free-for-all. And even with, I think, best practices, harkening back to Agile, you look at something, you say, okay, here's the best practice in the industry today. Let's try it. We see these items don't work for us. We're not going to treat this as if it is, something we can't deviate from. But everyone aligning around a core and at least trying those things helps you find out, to me, faster what doesn't work in a way that you can feed that back out into the organization.
Yeah, I just worry that we're going to end up like we have with Agile, where people go, well, Agile means Scrum, and we're going to implement Scrum, and we're abusing developers with Scrum and ceremonies, and that we're not going to get past that. And that we're repeating that. Scrum. I don't want to repeat that same pattern with feature flags. I bristle at anything called the best practice, partly for that reason.
Yeah, no, we've seen it with DevOps and Agile, right? No matter how much you disclaim, look, these are general guidelines. Bring them in and implement them in a way that's fit for your organization. Yet, time and time again, for Agile and DevOps, people will come at, give me the canned food spam version of this, please, so I can go deploy 1,000 times a week. And you're like, no, that's just not going to. Yeah, so I get you on that, Adam.
But I'm okay being the contrarian and being wrong. I've been wrong at least once before, so it's okay with me if it happens again.
So I'll cap this off, Alan, this way is I don't think any of us want the dogma, right? I think that's what we want to avoid. I have a different thought. I think we need patterns, not best practices. Just think of how developers think of, singleton is this, et cetera. I think that's what we need for feature flags, because there are great patterns for how people use this. It isn't just kill switches and functional switches, et cetera. There's more to how you use it. I think that would advance the state of the art the best. I don't think there's a book on that yet. And maybe someone here wants to write it.
Let's do it.
Be careful what you ask for. Hey guys, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think it's obviously a topic that we can talk a lot more about, but we don't have time today. So Hope, Adam, Brian, thanks for joining us on this episode of DevOps Unbound. Thank you for watching. We hope you found this interesting and learning a little bit about feature flags. Thanks to Tricentis for sponsoring this. It's always, they're a great partner to have on these, and I think you can see why listening to our conversations. I invite you to watch the next DevOps Unbound, which I think is a live roundtable edition coming up. Or depending when you watch this, it might be after, because I forget not everyone watches it the day it comes out. But you can catch future episodes of DevOps Unbound. You'll also find them on techstrong.tv as well. Until then, though, this is Alan Shimel for TechStrong, as well with Mitchell Ashley and Adam Kalsey, Brian Dawson, and Hope Lynch. Thanks for watching DevOps Unbound.